He slept on a freezing train station floor while people stepped over him like he didn't exist. 10 years later, he would stand in front of the same house holding the keys, and the people inside would have no idea who was at their door. Daniel never imagined that the night he turned 18 would be the last night he would ever sleep in his own bed. The argument started over something small, something stupid, like most of them did, but this time his stepfather's voice carried a finality Daniel had never heard before. "You're an adult now. If you don't like the rules, get out." His mother sat at the kitchen table staring into a cold mug of coffee, her hands wrapped around it as if it could anchor her to the moment. But she didn't look at Daniel, didn't defend him, didn't say a single word. He waited for her to speak, to stop it, to choose him. But the silence told him everything. At first he thought it was just another threat meant to scare him, until his stepfather walked to the door and opened it, letting the cold night air rush inside. Go. No bag packed, no money in his pockets, no plan in his head, just the sound of the door slamming behind him as he stepped into a world that suddenly had no place for him. He walked for hours because he didn't know where else to go. Friends stopped answering their phones after midnight, cafes closed, streetlights hummed over empty sidewalks, and by 3 in the morning the city felt like something alive that had swallowed him whole. That's when he found the train station, warm and bright and loud enough to drown out the panic rising in his chest. At first he sat on a bench trying to look like someone waiting for a train, but trains had stopped running hours ago, and eventually security told him to move along. So he slid down onto the floor near a vending machine, wrapping his arms around himself to keep warm while people passed by pretending not to see him. A businessman stepped over his legs without breaking stride. A woman pulled her child closer as if he were dangerous, and in that moment Daniel understood how quickly a person could become invisible. Morning came with fluorescent lights and the smell of burnt coffee, and he realized he hadn't slept at all. His back ached, his stomach twisted with hunger, and when he checked his phone, there was almost no battery left and no messages waiting, no missed calls, no one looking for him. Days blurred into weeks as he learned how to survive in ways he never thought he would need to. Memorizing which public bathrooms stayed unlocked at night, which stores threw away food at closing time, which corners security ignored. Winter arrived early that year, and the cold didn't just bite, it crushed, settling into his bones until he stopped feeling his fingers. And one night, as snow drifted through the broken roof of an abandoned building, he wondered if this was how people disappeared forever, not in some dramatic moment, but quietly, slowly, until the world forgot they had ever existed. Everything changed because of a mistake. A man rushing to catch a train dropped his wallet, and Daniel saw it hit the ground. For a moment, he just stared at it, thinking about the food it could buy, the nights it could keep him warm, and no one would ever know. But something inside him refused to let him become that person. He grabbed the wallet and ran, pounding on the closing train door until the man turned in shock. "Sir, your wallet!" The man looked at him cautiously, then with surprise, then with something Daniel hadn't seen directed at him in a long time: respect. He smiled, took the wallet, and studied Daniel for a second longer than expected, as if seeing past the dirty clothes and exhausted eyes. Then he asked a question no one had asked Daniel in months, a question that would change everything. "Do you want a job?" The question hit Daniel so hard he didn't answer right away. A job. It sounded unreal, like something from a life that no longer belonged to him. The man introduced himself as Victor, a logistics company owner who had built his business from nothing, and he said he didn't believe in luck, only in character, and returning the wallet without taking a single dollar told him everything he needed to know. Daniel expected a catch, a joke, something that would pull the ground out from under him again. But Victor simply wrote an address on the back of a receipt and told him to be there at 6 in the morning if he was serious. That night, Daniel didn't sleep, not because of the cold this time, but because hope felt more dangerous than despair. Hope could be taken away. At dawn, he stood in front of a warehouse on the edge of the city, exhausted, dirty, unsure if they would even let him inside. But Victor was already there, handing him a pair of work gloves and pointing toward a stack of heavy boxes that needed to be loaded onto trucks. The work was brutal, hours of lifting until his muscles screamed and his hands blistered and split, but Daniel didn't stop because pain felt better than being invisible. Days turned into weeks, and for the first time since he was thrown out, he had a routine, a place where people expected him to show up, where his absence would be noticed. Victor never treated him like a charity case. He treated him like someone who had been given a single chance and was expected not to waste it. When Daniel finally received his first paycheck, he stared at it for a long time before cashing it, as if it might disappear if he looked away. The money wasn't much, but to him, it felt like proof that he still existed. He rented the cheapest room he could find, a narrow space above a noisy street with peeling paint and a mattress that smelled like dust. But it had a door that locked and a window that let sunlight in, and that was enough. For the first time in months, he slept without fear of being kicked awake or chased away. Yet the past didn't loosen its grip so easily. Some nights he woke up convinced he was back on the station floor, heart racing, listening for footsteps that weren't there. He kept working, taking every extra shift, learning every task no one else wanted to do, because he understood something most people never did: how fragile stability really was. Victor watched all of it without saying much, but one evening he called Daniel into his office and asked him a question that made his stomach tighten. "What do you actually want to become?" Daniel didn't have an answer. Survival had consumed him for so long that thinking about a future felt like trying to see through fog. Victor nodded as if he expected that and told him something Daniel would never forget. "If you don't decide who you want to be, the world will decide for you, and it won't be kind." That night, Daniel walked back to his tiny room, feeling the weight of those words pressing down on him, realizing that the job hadn't just saved him, it had given him the terrifying freedom to choose what came next. And for the first time since the door slammed behind him on his 18th birthday, he allowed himself to imagine a life that didn't revolve around surviving day to day. A life where one day he might return to that house not as the boy who was thrown out, but as someone no one there would recognize. Daniel threw himself into work like it was the only thing holding his life together, because in many ways it was. Months passed, then a year, and the warehouse that once felt intimidating became the place where he rebuilt himself piece by piece. He learned how shipments were tracked, how deals were negotiated, how small mistakes could cost thousands, and Victor began trusting him with responsibilities no one else his age had. For the first time, Daniel felt something dangerous growing inside him: ambition. Not the kind fueled by ego, but the kind born from knowing exactly what it felt like to have nothing and swearing never to return there again. He saved every dollar he could, living in the same tiny room, eating cheap meals, ignoring the temptation to spend on things that would make life easier now but leave him vulnerable later. People at work started noticing the change. The quiet homeless kid had become someone focused, sharp, almost intimidating in his determination. Then came the opportunity that would alter his path completely. A delivery crisis hit when a major client threatened to cancel a contract worth more than the warehouse made in a year, and panic spread through the office as managers argued about what to do. Daniel listened, watching, calculating, until he stepped forward with a solution no one expected from him. He proposed rerouting shipments overnight using contacts he had quietly built with drivers and smaller companies, a risky plan that would either save everything or fail spectacularly. Victor studied him for a long moment before saying yes. For 48 hours, Daniel barely slept, coordinating calls, tracking trucks, solving problems as they exploded one after another, and when the final delivery arrived on time, the contract was saved. Something shifted after that. People stopped seeing him as the kid Victor had taken pity on and started seeing him as someone who could lead. Victor called him into the office again, but this time there was a different energy in the room, a sense that a door was opening. He offered Daniel a junior management position, a salary Daniel had never imagined earning, and a share of profits if he continued proving himself. The number sounded unreal, like a mistake, like too much responsibility for someone who still sometimes woke up expecting to see a train station ceiling above him. That night he walked through the city instead of going home, past restaurants he couldn't afford before, past stores he used to avoid because security watched him too closely. Realizing the world treated him differently now, even though inside he was still the same person who had been thrown out with nothing. But success didn't erase the past. It sharpened it. The memory of that slammed door became fuel, pushing him forward with a quiet intensity that unsettled people who didn't understand where it came from. And deep down, a thought began forming that he tried to ignore at first. A thought about returning one day not for revenge, not even for closure, but to prove to himself that the boy who left with empty pockets had not disappeared. He had transformed into someone no one there had the power to break again. Money didn't change Daniel overnight, but it changed how the world reacted to him, and that alone felt surreal. His new position meant better clothes, better mentioned apartments, business meetings in places he once walked past, pretending not to look inside. Yet every success carried a strange emptiness, like he was building a life on top of ruins no one else could see. He moved into a small but clean apartment with large windows overlooking the city, and the first night there he sat on the floor because he didn't own furniture yet, staring at the lights below, and thinking about the train station floor where he once counted coins just to eat. The contrast was almost painful. Work consumed him even more now, long hours turning into longer ones, because slowing down meant giving his thoughts space to wander back to places he didn't want to revisit. Victor began introducing him to investors and partners, people who spoke in calm voices about numbers large enough to change lives, and Daniel realized he was no longer just surviving. He was entering a world where decisions shaped other people's futures too. Then came the deal that would make his first real fortune. A struggling transport company was about to collapse, its owner desperate enough to sell for far less than it was worth, and while others saw risk, Daniel saw opportunity because he understood something they didn't: how close a person could come to losing everything. He convinced Victor to let him handle the acquisition, pouring weeks into negotiations, studying contracts late into the night, pushing himself until exhaustion blurred into obsession. When the deal finally closed, the profit was enormous. More money than Daniel's family had ever seen combined. More money than the boy sleeping on the station floor would have believed existed in the world. People congratulated him, celebrated him, called him a success story, but the victory didn't bring the satisfaction he expected. Instead, it stirred something buried deep inside him, a memory of a house, a kitchen, a slammed door, and the faces of people who had erased him from their lives as if he had never mattered. He tried to push it away, telling himself the past was irrelevant now, that success was the only answer he needed, but the mind doesn't obey logic when unfinished pain is involved. One evening, while sorting through documents from the acquisition, he found an old envelope tucked between the pages, addressed to someone with the same last name as his stepfather. The coincidence was small, meaningless even, yet it hit him like a shock, forcing memories back with a clarity he couldn't escape. That night, he didn't stay at the office or go to any celebratory dinner. Instead, he drove without a destination, through neighborhoods that grew quieter and more familiar with every mile, until he realized where he was heading without ever deciding to go there. He stopped the car at the end of a street he hadn't seen in 10 years, staring at the house where everything had ended and everything had begun, his hands tightening on the steering wheel as a storm of emotions he thought he had buried forever rose to the surface. The lights inside were on. Someone was home. And for the first time since he walked away with nothing, Daniel wondered if returning was not about proving anything to them, but about finally facing the part of himself that never left that doorstep. Daniel sat in the car for a long time, engine off, the silence pressing against his ears as if the world itself was holding its breath. The house looked smaller than he remembered, almost fragile, like something time had quietly worn down. Yet every detail was painfully familiar. The cracked driveway, the crooked mailbox, the kitchen window where he once stood as a child waiting for someone to come home. He hadn't planned this moment, hadn't prepared words or imagined what he would say if the door opened, but his body moved before his mind could stop it. He stepped out, the cool night air sharp in his lungs, and walked toward the house that had once expelled him into a life he never would have chosen. Each step felt heavier than the last, as if the past itself were pulling him backward. When he reached the door, he hesitated, his hand hovering inches from the surface that had slammed shut on his 18th birthday. For a second, he considered turning around, driving away, letting the past remain buried where it couldn't hurt him again. But something deeper, stronger, refused to let him run this time. He knocked. The sound echoed through the quiet street, louder than it should have been, final, irreversible. Footsteps approached from inside, slow, uncertain, and the door opened just enough for a chain to hold it in place. His mother stood there, older, thinner, her hair streaked with gray he didn't remember, her eyes searching his face with confusion that slowly turned into shock. She didn't recognize him at first, and that hurt more than anger ever could have. "Can I help you?" she asked cautiously, her voice fragile, as if she sensed something was wrong but couldn't yet see what. Daniel felt years of silence pressing against his throat, words trapped behind emotions he had never learned how to express, until finally he said the only thing that felt true. "It's me." The realization hit her like a physical force, her hand gripping the door as if she needed support to stay standing, her eyes filling with tears that came too quickly to stop. She whispered his name, as though saying it might break whatever fragile connection had suddenly reappeared between them. For a moment, neither of them moved, two strangers bound by a history too heavy to speak aloud. Then another voice came from inside, the voice Daniel had heard in his nightmares for years, harsher now, older but unmistakable. His stepfather stepped into view, his expression shifting from irritation to disbelief to something unreadable as he stared at the man standing on his doorstep. The tension in the air felt electric, like the seconds before a storm breaks. Daniel expected anger, accusations, maybe even the door slamming again, but instead there was silence, thick and suffocating, as if no one knew which version of the past they were supposed to acknowledge. And in that silence, Daniel realized something that changed everything. He had imagined this moment as a confrontation, a victory, a chance to show them who he had become. But standing there now, face to face with the people who had once defined his entire world, he didn't feel powerful or triumphant. He felt like the same 18-year-old boy, scared and uncertain, waiting to see whether he would be accepted or rejected all over again. The silence stretched so long it became unbearable, until his mother slowly unlatched the chain and opened the door wider, stepping aside without saying a word, as if she knew this moment had been waiting for years and could not be postponed any longer. Daniel crossed the threshold with a strange sense of disorientation, like stepping into a memory that had continued living without him. The house smelled the same: old wood, faint detergent, something warm cooking somewhere deeper inside, and for a split second he was 18 again, standing in the kitchen before everything fell apart. Nothing had really changed, and yet everything had. His stepfather remained near the hallway, arms crossed, studying him with a guarded expression that revealed neither hostility nor welcome, just a quiet tension that filled the room. They sat at the table where the argument had started a decade earlier, three people bound by a past none of them knew how to speak about, until finally his mother broke the silence with a trembling voice that carried years of unspoken regret. She told him she had looked for him at first, calling friends, checking hospitals, even going to the train station once because she had a feeling that was where he might be. But his stepfather had convinced her that Daniel had chosen to leave, that chasing him would only make things worse, and eventually the days turned into months, the months into years, and the fear of what she might discover kept her from trying again. Daniel listened without interrupting, each word landing like a weight on his chest, because part of him had always believed no one cared enough to look. His stepfather finally spoke, his voice rougher than Daniel remembered, admitting something that sounded almost like an apology, but not quite. That he had thought forcing Daniel out would make him stronger, that the world would teach him discipline in ways he couldn't, and that pride had kept him from admitting he might have been wrong when too much time had already passed. The explanation didn't erase the pain, didn't rewrite the nights of hunger and cold or the years of silence, but it cracked open a door Daniel hadn't realized was still locked inside him. He found himself looking around the room, not with anger but with a strange sadness, seeing how small their lives had remained while his had exploded outward into something none of them could have imagined. Then his mother asked the question that shifted the entire atmosphere, her eyes searching his face as if she were afraid of the answer. "Why did you come back?" Daniel had prepared for confrontation, for closure, maybe even for revenge, but standing there now, he understood the truth was simpler and heavier than any speech he could have rehearsed. He told her he hadn't come to reopen wounds or prove anything, that he had built a life beyond this house, a life that no longer depended on their approval or rejection, but that some part of him needed to see them again to understand whether the past still controlled him or if he had finally become free. The words hung in the air, raw and honest, and for the first time since he arrived, the tension began to loosen, replaced by something fragile and uncertain. That might have been the beginning of forgiveness, or the realization that forgiveness was not about forgetting what happened, but about refusing to let it define the rest of his life. Daniel stayed in that house for hours, longer than he planned, longer than he thought he could endure, listening to fragments of stories about the years he had missed, about illnesses, debts, quiet struggles that had unfolded behind the same walls he once believed had erased him without a second thought. The anger he carried for so long didn't vanish, but it shifted, losing its sharp edges, becoming something heavier and more complicated. He realized that while he had been fighting to survive out there, they had been shrinking in here, trapped in routines and regrets, each of them paying a different price for the same night that shattered their family. When he finally stood to leave, his mother's eyes filled with panic, as if she feared this was another disappearance, another decade of silence starting the moment he stepped outside. His stepfather didn't speak, but the tension in his posture revealed more than words could. At the door, Daniel paused, looking at the place that had once defined the boundaries of his entire world. And he understood that coming back had not been about them at all. It had been about reclaiming the part of himself that had been left behind. He reached into his coat and pulled out a small envelope, placing it on the table without ceremony. Inside were documents, bank confirmations, everything needed to change their lives in ways they would never have imagined. He told them quietly that the house would soon be fully paid off, that the debts suffocating them would disappear, that they would never again have to choose between heating and food in winter. His mother stared at him in disbelief, tears falling freely now, unable to comprehend why he would do this after everything that had happened. Even his stepfather's composure cracked, his voice unsteady as he asked the question that hung in the air like a confession. "Why would you help us?" Daniel didn't answer immediately because the truth was something he had only just understood himself. He said he wasn't doing it for them, not really, but for the 18-year-old boy who walked out with nothing, the boy who deserved proof that his suffering had not turned him into someone bitter or cruel. Helping them was not forgiveness, not reconciliation, not a return to the past. It was a declaration that the pain had not destroyed who he chose to become. He told them he had built a life far away, a future that didn't depend on revisiting this place again, and that this would likely be the last time they saw him for a long while. The realization hit them all at once. He wasn't coming back to stay. He was coming back to close a chapter. When he stepped outside into the cold night, The air felt different, lighter, as if a weight he had carried for 10 years had finally slipped from his shoulders. For the first time since he was thrown out, he didn't feel like he was running from the past or chasing the future. He felt present, grounded, free in a way that success alone had never given him. And as he walked toward his car, he understood that the true victory had never been the money, the career, or the house he could now buy for anyone he chose. The true victory was that he could walk away without hatred, without needing anything from the people who once had the power to break him. Daniel didn't start the engine right away. He sat in the darkness, hands resting on the steering wheel, watching the house through the windshield as one light after another turned off inside, until only a faint glow remained in the kitchen window. 10 years ago, he had walked away from that place with nothing but anger and fear, convinced that the world had ended for him on that doorstep. Now he realized it had only begun. The road ahead was quiet, empty, stretching into the distance like a promise he no longer doubted. As he finally drove away, he didn't look back, not because he wanted to forget, but because he no longer needed to hold on. Weeks passed, then months, and life moved forward with the relentless momentum he had learned to match. His business expanded, new projects filled his days, new cities replaced old memories, yet something inside him had settled into a calm he had never known before. One winter morning, while reviewing reports in his office, he received a message that made him pause, a simple photo sent from an unknown number. It showed the house, freshly painted, the broken mailbox replaced, the driveway repaired, small signs of care and effort visible in every detail. There was no text, no explanation, just the image. Daniel understood immediately. It wasn't a request, not a plea, not even an apology. It was proof that his return had changed something there too. He saved the photo without replying, placing the phone down with a quiet sense of closure. Years later, long after his story had become the kind people told as inspiration, he would sometimes think about the train station floor, the cold that seeped into his bones, the feeling of being invisible while the world stepped around him. He never erased that memory because it reminded him who he had been when no one was watching, when the only choice was whether to give up or keep moving forward. On the anniversary of the night he was thrown out, he did something no one knew about. He visited the station again, not in a suit or expensive car, but quietly, anonymously, leaving envelopes with money hidden where those who needed them most would find them, never waiting to see who picked them up. He didn't do it for recognition or redemption, only because he remembered exactly what it felt like to believe no one cared whether you survived. As he walked away into the early morning light, the city waking around him, Daniel understood the truth that had taken half his life to learn. Sometimes the most powerful revenge is not proving others wrong, but refusing to become the person pain tried to turn you into. His life had not been defined by the night he lost everything, but by every decision he made afterward. Every step forward taken when stopping would have been easier. And somewhere, in a house that once rejected him and a station that once sheltered him, pieces of his story remained, not as reminders of suffering, but as proof that even the most broken beginning can lead to a life no one could have predicted.